September 1st, 1959. My mother, Claudia del Ponto Castello Branco, was born. She was birthed in a maternity hospital in Copacabana, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. She was born into a period of a lot of political tension. Communism was on the rise in Brazil, and the military was strong with censorship to prevent its spread. My mom spent her childhood living at the beach in Rio de Janeiro, specifically Copacabana. She remembers going to the beach daily, but perhaps my mom's fondest memories of her childhood in Rio are those of Carnival in the streets, of her celebrating and dressing up and just having an overall blast. My grandfather, father of my mother, Lauro Castello Branco, was a Capitán de Mar Agueira, a high-ranking officer, one rank below Almirante or Admiral in the Brazilian Navy. My grandfather was stationed to a base in Alagoas in the northern part of Brazil in 1964. He took his family to this base just as tensions reached a breaking point between the communists and the government. In March 1964, the Brazilian army became very scared of a threat of communist rebellion. The coup d'état in March 1964 was the overthrow of President João Goulart, who wanted to nationalize the oil industry of Brazil. Goulart seemed to be dangerously left-wing, to the point of communist to the military. The chief of staff of the army, Humberto de Alencar Castelo Branco, circulated warnings of communism in a letter to all the military. The United States CIA under President Lyndon Johnson even gave aid to Brazil in its overthrow of President Goulart. Castelo Branco was one of the generals who helped overthrow Goulart and led the military to power. He was elected in April 1st, 1964, as the first president of this new military regime. My mom spent the next 5 years until she was around 10 years old at this base in Alagoas, Brazil. This period is characterized by heavy monitoring by the Brazilian government and fear of another communist rebellion. Since Humberto Castelo Branco was actually related to my mother's grandfather's cousin, she was even visited by the president. She recalls the time that all the children at the base were sitting on a wall looking down at the president, screaming his name until they got his attention. Around my mother's 10th birthday, they left the base and headed back to Rio de Janeiro because my grandfather was assigned another job. Once back in Rio de Janeiro, my mom took up volleyball and continued ballet dancing. However, these programs were heavily monitored. It wasn't like the past where one could creatively express oneself in art or in freedom of speech. My mom in high school remembers teachers who spoke out against the government. She claims she never saw them again. People tended to disappear when they spoke out. This extremely oppressive government made it hard for anyone to learn about politics of the time. The government controlled what they wanted the students to learn. My mother's generation was taught to be cogs in the machine of the government. What the government said was the truth. The military was not wrong, and there is no freedom of opinion. My mom lived under the military until 1982, when she realized her goal of a job in fashion would not be achieved in Brazil. She journeyed to Los Angeles at the age of 23. She learned 1 year of English and then attended the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandise for 2 years. It wasn't until 1988, though, that Brazil, her home country, would become a democracy once again. And for the first time ever in her life, she was allowed to vote. This was a monumental occasion for my mother, because it was the first time she actually got to vote for what she wanted for her country, rather than just having it force-fed to her. The next world event that affected my mother happened the next year in August 1989. This was the fall of the Berlin Wall. It marked a change for the world in terms of freedom of speech and equality for all. Having come from an oppressed nation, she also knew how these people felt and what liberation felt like. Around this time, my mother met my father, and a couple years down they got married, and eventually I was born. My mother has been affected just as any other person in America, been by conflicts in Iraq and with North Korea. But most recently, she was affected by the inauguration of Barack Obama. For many Brazilians, including my mother, he is an inspiration for ethnicities to take valuable jobs, including positions in government. My mom has lived a very interesting life and continues to live with me and my father.